Okay, I've got to record a new video. I got a new mic. It's been a while since I recorded. What am I going to make my new video about? Barbie, of course. There's been a lot of talk about Barbie. People on the right complaining that it's very political. People on the left, I guess, being mad that right wingers are mad that it's political. I've never understood this complaint. Like, if it's explicitly a political movie. If you haven't seen it, there's gonna be lots of spoilers in this, but the film is literally talking about feminism and patriarchy the whole time. So if you disagree with that stance, obviously you're gonna have something to say about the movie. Now, I have heard a couple people arguing about whether or not the movie is secretly based, and I'll throw my 2 cents in. When I first watched the movie, I had this thought, and then I saw some other people talking about it, and so maybe consciously or subconsciously, the film is conveying a bunch of based things. To give a short synopsis, a very, very short synopsis of the plot, there's Barbie, played by Margot Robbie, and she lives in Barbie world, and all of the Barbies are like these overachiever, girl boss characters who have, quote unquote, fixed the world and for feminism because they can girl boss their way to the top of the hierarchy. The government is all women, all of the jobs are women, and the men don't have any jobs. So the Ken dolls do nothing. All they do is exist to please the women. And so very clearly and explicitly later in the film, this is contrasted with the way that the movie portrays the real world, where it's the reverse. And all of the men have all of the power and all the jobs and all of the other stuff, and the women just exist to accent the men. I've heard Greta Gerwig say she's comparing this to the Adam and Eve story, right, where the woman is made to complement the male. So she's saying, okay, in Barbie world, Ken was literally made to complement his female counterpart. And so the film explores those gender themes, I guess. Long story short, Barbie leaves, goes to the real world with Ken. Ken sees the real world's patriarchy, thinks it's based, and he's like, I'm going to bring patriarchy back to Barbie Land. Barbie doesn't know this. Barbie goes back to Barbie Land. She realizes Ken has taken over Barbie Land and has instituted authoritarian male patriarchy, which is just a mirror opposite, by the way, of the Barbie Land rules, where all of the women have all the power. And so you might be saying, okay, is the point of this film going to be that they restore the balance of power to an even new, middle ground where everyone has equal rights? It's not actually what happens. What happens is, all of the women are portrayed as being happy in Kendom. And they're willing to give up all their power, and they love being with the men. It's only once an ugly Barbie explains to them that their life sucks that they change their minds. And then once they realize the state that they're in, they rebel also with Barbie, take over Barbie Land again, overthrow Kendom, and reinstitute matriarchy. And there's a bunch of other little things going on. There's a real world subplot that's not really relevant. But and then, order is restored, women are in charge. And there's this weird joke halfway through that made me wonder if secretly the movie was based. There's a comment once they overthrow Kendom and reinstitute the matriarchy, all the women take all the government positions again. And the men are like, can we get any? And they're like, well, you can get some circuit justices until in the real world there are female justices on the Supreme Court. You can't be on the Supreme Court. And that was the first thing that made me start thinking, wait, is this movie making fun of feminists? Because obviously there literally are 4 women on the Supreme Court. So either the film completely ignorantly assumed there were no women on the Supreme Court and was just wrong, or was trying to straw man the feminist position, that they're ignorant or something like that, or that Barbie is stupid or something. I've seen people talk about maybe this is supposed to be a commentary on Roe v. Wade being overturned, even though Roe v. Wade was instituted by an all-male court, and Roe v. Wade was overturned by a court that was 5-4 men to women. So, not exactly the patriarchy enforcing itself. But then made me start thinking, okay, maybe this movie is a little bit sarcastic. And then the first thing I started thinking about, was the way that Ruth Handler, who invented Barbie, is portrayed. She obviously it's kind of a joke, but she's the person who invented Barbie. But the first way we meet her is she's in this room in the Mattel Corp building, and I tried to find a picture, but I can't find any online. in it's like portrayed as aggressively feminine and like homey and calm and um, positive, and maternal even, and it's like almost romanticizing this womanhood from like the 30s or 40s or 50s, and there's like this old architecture and this like they're drinking tea, and throughout the movie Ruth becomes this like maternal educational figure for Barbie, where if you realize in Barbie Land there's no like old people, it's all young attractive people, and the only person who's not those things is Ruth. And then actually there's an appearance, I believe, by Ruth's real life daughter, Barbara Handler, who Barbie is based off of. She's in the film and she's old, obviously, and Barbie makes a point of looking at her and saying, "You're beautiful." And there's something to like, oh wait, motherhood is kind of a theme in this movie. When they go to the real world, the mom taking care of the daughter is portrayed very positively. Of course, the daughter is like a very left character who is also constantly being made fun of. She goes on a rant. The daughter goes on a rant. They both the daughter and the mom go on a rant, but at different times. But the daughter's rant, she basically calls Barbie a fascist and says all this other stuff. And obviously, I think it's kind of supposed to be making fun of young left-wing radical teenagers. And then later on in the film, you can choose to take this ironically or unironically. The mom has a rant about all the contradictions of being a woman in the modern era. And the only criticism maybe is that it's a contradiction, right? And there's like stuff about how you should be a mom, but you should also work and all these other things. And it's like, it's kind of pointing out that it's like it was better before all of these contradictions were introduced into social society. And think about the way that the Ken world and the Barbie world are kind of paralleled. The Ken world is like full of horses and cowboys and stuff, and Barbie's very pink and like neon. But that's not actually kind of the like cozy femininity. It's like this artificial versions of those two gender things, right? Like cowboys and like fur and stuff is not really what it means to be masculine, right? In fact, there's a scene where Alan, this character who's not supposed to be very overtly masculine, beats up a bunch of guys, and it's really impressive. Aside from like maybe some of the weird stuff going on with Alan in the movie, but it's something like, oh, that was a valiant male move as this guy sticking up for and protecting women in the film. There's no scene where Barbie starts karate chopping people. In fact, when they retake Kendom from the Kens, the Barbies seduce the Kens into taking it over. They take advantage of something that's traditionally feminine. The movie definitely has a very strong dichotomy between feminine and masculine. And again, these scenes with Ruth Handler kind of remind you that there's something very valuable about the motherhood of older women. In fact, the very beginning of the Barbie film is a montage of all of these women in like an older era. They're dressed like they're in like the 40s or 50s, smashing their baby dolls in favor of the very sexualized Barbie doll, right? And so you might be like, maybe this film is really critical of the more modern feminism, like everything is pink and you can be a girl boss attitude. Especially when you start examining the Ken story. I think one of the, I got this out of order. When you start looking online about the reactions to the Barbie movie, Ken is like a huge part of the promotional material. And the fan reaction is to the kind of hilarity of the Ken character. He's very interesting, and he has his own little arc. And what does he learn? Well, the way that the Barbies take over Kendom from him is that they make all of the Kens jealous, because every Ken and Barbie has their like affiliated their affiliated partnership. And so what the Barbies do to retake Kendom is they make the Kens fight amongst each other by making them jealous. And the lesson that Ken learns, because the whole movie he's trying to get Barbie's approval, that he doesn't need female approval and that he needs to be happy with himself. I'll talk about this more later, but this Ken arc makes him very sympathetic. There's all these songs in the film that are actually pretty funny and pretty enjoyable, of Ken basically lamenting like, why am I not enough for Barbie? I want her to love me, but she just sees me as a friend and all these kinds of things. And people have memed the hell out of these out of this Ken character. And he literally, Ryan Gosling also kind of has this extra textual Sigma reputation that the movie has only exploded. Like, it's just so stark. Now, it's possible that Greta Gerwig meant to, I guess you could say, reverse this, or acknowledging that he was this Sigma male and then make him in this movie take advantage of that reputation and then kind of subvert it by making him realize that he doesn't need female approval. And he's kind of like this, I don't know, simplistic bimbo character who doesn't like understand the world and is pining for a over masculinized world. But this gets to what I think is so interesting about this. There's this reversal, right? So, okay, when Barbie goes into the real world, she sees the real world as a patriarchy, okay? And so people watch this and like, it's cartoonish how they describe living as a, woman in the real world. Like, it's impossible, you can't get a good job, like nobody respects you, you're constantly being sexually harassed. I mean, they make a point actually out of Barbie's outfits. She gets catcalled in the real world because of what she wears, or not because of what she wears, but that's not wouldn't be how the movie phrased it. But like, it draws your attention again to, okay, Barbie's supposed to be this woman's empowerment symbol, but she's incredibly sexualized, as opposed to the kind of simplistic, honest femininity of the Ruth character, that is kind of in the back. And at the end of the film, Barbie goes to Ruth and not to the other Barbies for her like self-fulfillment arc, and she goes into the real world after having a long speech from Ruth. But we'll get to that in a second. What I think you can think about this movie as is that the Barbies actually don't represent women, they represent men. They make this parallel quite explicit. And that the men, the Kens, represent women. I mean, they make that quite explicit with the, what I was saying earlier about the Adam and Eve parallels and the idea that in the real world this is patriarchy. So if you followed that out, it would be something like, oh, men justified themselves in this world by being male bosses, the things that they did, like they actually achieve, right? Because the Barbies, when they lose all their jobs and all these things, like they have this weird sense of liberation. They can just listen to the Kens now and not be, in charge. But then the movie has this reversal moment where the just right order is restored when the previously dominant sex retakes society, right? And they realize that it's their like kind of duty or responsibility. And the Kens are like, thank God we don't have to do this anymore. There's a scene literally where Ken's like, I didn't even know what I was doing when I was in charge. And it's almost like the Kens were overreacting to the Barbie land authoritarianism with a cartoonish version of masculinity that they're forcing onto society, even though it's not really well informed. And in some ways, I think it's pretty likely, in my opinion, that Greta Gerwig was trying to make that kind of point with Barbie, right? That what the feminist movement in the 90s that Greta Gerwig kind of grew up with in the early 2000s, it's like very pinkified girl boss feminism, is kind of hollow. It has this cartoonish version of womanhood that men gave women, right? Men are like, oh, all women like is pink and dressing in bathing suits and stuff like that. And men justify themselves by their work ethic. Lots of men take pride in being a provider and being a high achiever and all these things. But I think that the subtle undertone of the film is that actually that's not what femininity is, right? There's something lost by the Barbie movement of true femininity and true feminine beauty in a way. And if you take it from its kind of you take the parallels, Ken wanted self-worth from female approval, from the Barbie approval. And in some ways, women wanted male approval because of the kind of gender dynamic. And if you follow that through, women shouldn't just be looking for male approval. And so they shouldn't be playing male games, right? Like, so men justify themselves by their work ethic. But what should women justify themselves by, right? Right? This, and then you're watching this if you're a Christian and you're like, oh my God, there's a conversation about justification going on in this film. What makes you righteous? What makes you good? What makes you okay? How can you when can you accept yourself? And I think what it's kind of saying to Ken, right, is you should have this own confidence in yourself and in who you are, that you don't need the approval of the opposite sex to justify yourself. Now, of course, the film has this kind of empty justification narrative about just kind of accepting who you are, right? But it does reject, I think, justification by works in some weird way. This is like the echoes of Christianity in the culture. It's saying you don't have to do all these things to be justified. Of course, in Barbie Land, the Barbie Land is only in good order when women are doing all of the right jobs. So there is some of that, like women are justified by works. But actually, if you pay attention, Barbie rejects Barbie Land at the end of the film. She leaves to go to the real world. And the real world, there's a weird conversation with Ruth, who's like their god, I guess, right? Because, she invented Barbie. And so she has this weird out-of-body conversation with Ruth. And Ruth is kind of like, the world is suffering. And you have to embrace it. You constantly struggle. And again, I can't help but listen to that and I'm like, is this against feminism? Because it feels like what women... there was a whole rant earlier in the movie to justify the Barbie Land revolt, where the mom from the real world is like, oh, look at all these unfair things I have to endure as a woman. That means we should have this revolution. And then you hear the Ruth speech and you're like, wait, aren't these contradictory messages? She's kind of, obviously they don't put it in this language, but Ruth is kind of saying life is about taking up your cross and bearing it. And just like accepting your lot in life and moving on and not being worried about the approval of society for your own justification. In some ways, that message, I don't know how that doesn't detract from the feminist message, right? The feminist message being that we have to change these elements about society so that I can individually be fulfilled. It's, all of these things are there, in the movie. And I think that it's surprising. I think a lot of people went into this movie thinking it wasn't going to be political, and then they were shocked because it was political, which is fair. But then I think if you actually break down the themes of the film, there is some subversive politics in there. I don't think it's a coincidence that Greta Gerwig also directed Little Women, which provides this kind of classical view of femininity. In some ways, the story of Little Women, by the way, is the story of this boyish woman coming into her own, and the same kind of message of like, she learns to accept herself by her own confidence rather than from male approval and from being seen as a man or being justified by the terms of these male characters in the story, or not necessarily, but there's something about the beauty of femininity that's very strong, I would say, in Greta Gerwig's Little Women. And it's this classic 19th century femininity. It's not this like hyper pink, which is I think the way this is marketed. It's not this kind of modern feminism stuff. And if you watch Lady Bird, which is another Greta Gerwig movie, you don't get the impression that we live in this horribly sexist world. You get the impression that some boys, clearly Greta Gerwig has a thing about boys who need female approval and that they are obsessed with it. So that's definitely in Lady Bird too. But I get the sense that she kind of has some subversive things to say with the movie. That she's trying to package in a way that are digestible to the mainstream. And I think in some interesting way, consciously or subconsciously, what's happening in this film is it's so overtly liberal that actual examination of it, for a minute, you're like, oh, wait, it's not. And again, the first thing that clued me into this was like obvious lack of true facts, right? There's a scene where Mattel CEOs are in a room and all of them are men. And it's so cartoonish, it's funny. And the bit is, of course, they're talking about how much they understand womanhood and the importance of Barbie. And the CEO, played by Will Ferrell, is such an interesting character because the movie doesn't portray him as cynical. The movie portrays him as caring, quote unquote, very deeply about women. There's a moment in the end where he sacrifices profits for Barbie's sake. Like he's trying to hunt down Barbie the whole film because she's in the real world and it's going to cause a scandal. But he literally tries to put her in a box. in some crazy way, I think what is happening is that they're literally saying Barbie is created by this like hardworking male corporate culture. You know what I mean? And that there was something authentic beforehand. But of course, again, Barbie was actually invented by a woman. I mean, if this is supposed to be a genuine, just like, oh, haha, corporations are all run by men. I mean, you can look up the history of the Barbie company, Mattel, and yes, the CEO is male now, but they have female shareholders. The scene where there's a giant table of all men running the company talking about womanhood is not really true. You know, Hollywood certainly isn't like this. Companies now are dying to hire women for these kinds of positions. It's just so obviously not how the world is that I'm watching, and I'm like, maybe this cartoonishness is supposed to be like, you know, to make you realize that it's not true. Because think about another way this movie could have been. What it could have been was the real world, or there's one world where there's this strong patriarchy, and there's this one world where there's this strong matriarchy, right? And then they realize they need to reform and kind of come to this middle equal ground, right? But it's not the movie we got, you know? It's not this like men and women are equal. Isn't overtly not the message. There's no point in the movie where Greta Gerwig turns to the camera, or Barbie turns to the camera, and she's like, men and women have equal dignity. That line never happens in the film. It doesn't. And men and women are treated very differently. I mean, I think I saw on Twitter people complaining that the movie is so quote-unquote heteronormative, and like the sex binary is so strong in this film. You know, those are my thoughts. Maybe I'm reading way too much into the Barbie movie, but I thought maybe some people would benefit from hearing my thoughts on the film. A couple notes on just my channel. So if you really like this video, I can't say I do a lot of Barbie content, but I definitely am trying to do more culture related stuff soon. Theology has been fun, and I'm still planning on doing lots of theology videos, but I think there's something important going on in the culture that a lot of theology channels miss, that I would really like to, you know, speak to, right? Things like these gender issues that I'm talking about with Barbie. I think those are important. I think they're clearly happening conversations that we as Christians need to kind of get behind. Anyway, but if you like the channel, be sure to subscribe. I have a locals, if people want to support me on my locals. I have an Instagram. You can get all that stuff in my YouTube bio. If you like, subscribe. You know, there's lots of people who are subscribed, who watch my channel pretty regularly. I can see from the analytics that don't subscribe. Please subscribe. You get my stuff. Please, you know, hit the like button and the bell. Subscribe. I think I'm getting kind of shadow banned maybe. Some of my more recent videos haven't gotten as many video views as the videos that came before them, which is kind of weird. They are specifically niche topics though, so it could be that as well. Just hit the, you know, the little ringer on the bell button next to the subscribe, just in case, so you get notified for my videos. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this kind of like movie review stuff, let me know. Keep me updated. All right. Thank you. God bless.